everybody, and welcome to RVN TV. What's our program called again? CEO Chat?
Chat, exactly.
Joe Asamendi?
Alcini.
There you go.
Here we go.
That's us. And we have a terrific guest. His name is David Friedman. And he's the CEO and the founder of a company called High Performing Culture. If I think I have that right?
You do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great to have you on the program because you're talking about something that everybody is using. They say the word, but they don't understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, getting a definition of culture, I think, is probably a great way to start the conversation.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because everybody is talking about culture these days, and more so than it ever used to be. I mean, I think back 5 or 10 years ago, it was kind of like a topic you didn't talk about much. These days, everybody's talking about it, but nobody knows what it is or what to do about it. And to me, culture is really the way people behave in an organization. And I think the thing that's really important to understand is that the culture in any organization, whether we're talking about a sports team like the Eagles, or we're talking about a company or a group of friends or a church group or any other group, that the culture in the group has an enormous influence over how everybody does what they do. And that's why, you know, my point of view is if you understand that, and I always say, like, you don't have to have a PhD in organizational behavior to know this. We know this because we've all been in great cultures or bad ones. If we understand that, then as the leader, if I was the leader of a company, if I had some way that I could purposely create the kind of culture that would cause people to perform at a higher level, gee, that would seem like a pretty obvious thing to do.
That would make a lot
Would make
of
a
sense
big
to
difference.
just about any business person.
Exactly. And yet, as obvious as that is and as much sense as that makes, my experience is most leaders don't purposely create a culture. Their culture just ends up, it just sort of happens by accident. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, instead of taking control over it. And most don't know how to do it, and I do. And I teach them how to do it.
So unless you're really lucky,
Yes.
the culture that's just going to spring up on its own is not going to be the kind of culture that's going to make a big difference to your bottom line in a positive way.
Yes.
In fact, it might even hurt your bottom line.
It may. And what I would say about that, Joe, is that, you know, the way that culture, if you don't take control of it, you don't purposely create the culture, the way that culture happens in groups of people, again, whether we're talking about a company or a group of friends, is typically in every group of people, there are strong personalities. Somebody who, they're just kind of like the alpha person and they set the tone. So if you think of groups of friends of yours, guys that you play golf with or do whatever with, there's always a leader in the group, somebody who sets the tone for how the group operates. And they exert a disproportionate amount of influence over the way the group operates. Well, the same thing happens in companies, that if as leaders, if we don't purposely create the culture we want, it's going to mostly be dictated by the strongest personalities. And those strongest personalities are not necessarily the designated managers and supervisors and leaders. They're just people with strong personalities. And if those people happen to be, to your point, Joe, if they happen to be, Al, you know, high-performing, quality-oriented, great kind of people, great, it'll all work out well. And but if they're not, if the people with the strong personalities happen to be cynical jerks with lousy attitudes,
then you're going to get a bad culture.
that's exactly
That's
it. And so the point is, why would you leave that to chance?
That's exactly, that was what the point I was getting from all that is if it's just a random process, you're going to get a random effect from that. But it could be a purposeful, mindful process if you do it right.
Yes.
So if I were a leader who was concerned that maybe my culture was out of control or out of my control, not something I was influencing in a positive way, how would you help me change that? Where would we start?
I'll answer that. I'll make one just sort of tweak to your question if I can. And that is that actually most of the people that I work with are companies that their culture isn't out of control. It's a good culture, but it's been by accident. It's fortunately worked out to be pretty well, but they realize, yikes, I mean, I'm lucky it's worked out okay, but I ought to be a lot more systematic about it. So it's not just this, what I teach is not just for people who are dysfunctional, screwed up companies. In fact,
you're leveling up no matter what. So you might be a great company, but you
95% of the companies we work with are already really good companies.
Got it.
We're just taking it to another level. So to answer your question, how do you do that? So I organize the steps that it takes to purposely, systematically create a culture in an organization around a framework that I call the 8-step framework. 8 different things, and when we do these 8 different things, this is how you purposely create a culture. And while all of these 8 steps are really important, there are really 2 of these steps that my experience tells me drive probably 90% of the impact. You do these 2 things well, you're going to be 90% of the way down the road to success. You don't do these 2 things well, you're not going to get very far.
Is this something you developed?
This is all stuff I've created from my experiences. So I spent 27 years as the CEO of a company that I built, and all of our success was based on the culture we had built. And so after I built that company, I sold it, wrote the first of a couple of books about that. It was a book called Fundamentally Different. This is fundamentally different. So I wrote that book really as a way of capturing the things I had learned and taught. That book briefly led to people asking me to speak. As people heard me speak, people said, hey, could I hire you to help me? And the next thing I knew, I was building another career. I wrote the second book called Culture by Design, which really goes through this whole methodology that I teach.
That's the 8 steps that
That's
you were
the 8
talking about.
steps,
Maybe you can summarize
exactly.
those 8 steps for us.
Well, I'll do that. I want to focus on the 2, and I'll come back to the others, because I think the 2 are for your audience. When they understand these 2 things, that's the biggest driver.
Terrific. That's
So
great.
the first of those 8 steps is all about the first question you asked, which is, how do we define what we want the culture to be? Because if we can't define exactly what is the culture we're trying to create in this company, we're not going to do it very effectively. I differ from most of the world in how I teach people to do that. Because most of the world is all fixated on creating this set of traditional core values. And I make a really big distinction between what I call values and what I call behaviors. And I think it's more than just semantics. So the difference is, a value to me is an abstract concept: quality, teamwork, loyalty, respect, etc. A behavior, in contrast, is an action. It's something I can literally see people doing.
I think that's such a great, important distinction.
It's a really important distinction. So examples of behavior, some of the behaviors I teach in my own company are things like honor commitments. That's something you do. Practice blameless problem solving. Be a fanatic about response time. Get clear on expectations. These are behaviors. These are actions
that people can do.
They
You
do.
can see them do it.
Exactly. So a value is a thing, and I sometimes think it's like a noun. A behavior is a verb. It's an action.
Well, we talk about values sometimes as you say, it's an abstract kind of a concept.
Yes.
If you ask SEAL Team 6 what are their core values, you should get different answers than you would if you ask a nursing unit at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. The values might be the same because they're abstract, but the behaviors are totally different.
Now, the reason that this distinction is such a big deal is that the problem with the way most organizations use the traditional core values is because they're so abstract, as you see, they mean too many different things to too many different people, and they're very difficult to operationalize.
You can't operationalize.
I'll give you a really simple example. I'll see many companies that will have the core value for respect. We should all respect each other. Sounds good. But what does that word mean? I mean, it means different things in different areas.
How do I know that you're respecting me?
If you grew up in an inner city gang in Philly, your definition of what it looks like to respect somebody or to diss them could be completely different than what it might mean in your family. So just saying one of our core values is respect isn't all that useful. Behaviors, because they're more action-oriented, are a lot easier to teach and coach and guide and give people feedback about. So we teach people to define culture not in terms of a broad set of values, but rather in terms of the behaviors that as a leader you say, if we could get our people to do those things more consistently, man, we'd be amazing, we'd be incredible. I give those behaviors a name. I call them fundamentals because I think they're fundamental to success. And so this whole system that I teach is called the fundamental system. So the first thing we do is to help a company create a definition of the culture they want by virtue of the set of fundamentals they want their people to practice. Now, once we have that, the second step in this overall framework, which is really the game changer, and I should say at the outset that all of this is so simple. When you understand this, it is so obvious and simple.
What you're really doing is clarifying something else too, which is best practice.
Yes.
I mean, best practice is a term that gets bandied about all the time. Best practice is by definition behavior
Yes.
And it sounds like your fundamentals. I mean,
Yes.
that's it. This is what we do around
This is the way this is what we do around
Yeah,
here.
this is what we
Now,
do around here.
the way we make that really come alive is the second step in this 8-step framework. I call it creating rituals.
Okay.
So a ritual is some behavior that you do over and over and over again until it becomes second nature. Remember when we were kids, we used to start every school day doing the Pledge of Allegiance every
Right.
day.
Sure.
We go to a ball game, we do the national anthem.
Right.
Some people before a meal, they may start with a prayer.
Right.
They're just routines. It's just part of how we operate. The reason that rituals are so important to success is that most people, and by extension most companies, aren't very good at sticking with things.
Okay.
You know, we come out with new programs and new initiatives, and for 3 months we do it, and then they don't last. When something becomes...
You're lucky if they do it.
Exactly, it's usually a few weeks. Once something becomes a ritual, it's just second nature. It's just what we do.
It's just what you do.
It's just what we do.
Right.
So the way we use this concept is that we take this set of fundamentals, we roll it out to the company in really interactive, engaged ways, and then we begin to practice them every week through a series of rituals. So the concept here is the first week after it gets rolled out, we take week number 1, and all week long, everybody in the company is focused on the first fundamental, practicing it, working on it, tuning up their awareness, really focusing on it through a series of rituals, which I'll describe in just a second.
Okay.
The second week, everybody in the company, everywhere in every department, every location, is focused on fundamental number 2. The week after that, 3 and 4 and 5 and so on until we get to the end of our list. And at the end of our list, we go back to the beginning and we do it over and over and over and over and over again until it becomes second nature.
Right.
So what does a ritual look like? Well, I'll give you just one example of a ritual that actually I practice and all of our companies practice. So one of the rituals we do is that every time we have a meeting in our company, whether it's a project team meeting, a department meeting, a leadership meeting, even customer meetings, if we have a meeting in our company this week, every single one of those meetings, the first agenda item of the meeting is the fundamental of the week. And we take the first few minutes and we talk about it. What does it mean? How do we practice it? Did it just come up with a customer recently? And we just dialogue about it for a few minutes. So give you an example. So my company's fundamental this week is called Find a Way. It's actually on my wristband.
Oh, okay.
It's called Find a Way.
Find a Way.
And it's all about going into situations, not making up all the excuses like you call some companies and all they want to do is tell you all the reasons they can't do what you want. Finding a way is about starting every situation by saying, there's got to be a way we can do this. How can I be resourceful and creative and find a way to solve this problem? So if this were one of our meetings, I'd be starting off, I'd say, so this week we're on our fundamentals called Find a Way, and I'd call on people to get them engaged. I might say, so, now, can you think of a situation where you called somebody and they just were really creative and they just went to the ends of the earth to find a way to solve that problem? And what happened? Or, Joe, you ever deal with somebody that all they want to do is make up all the reasons they can't do it?
Sure,
Or how's that make you feel? And now we get into a brief conversation and we spend 3 or 4 minutes talking about it and then we move on. We don't want to take over the meeting, but every meeting, everywhere in the company this week, every single meeting starts with a discussion about that fundamental.
That's great.
Next week, every single meeting starts with the next one, and so on. So we create a number of different rituals like that that give people lots of opportunity all week long to do all kinds of things, to think about, talk about, focus on, engage in the fundamental of the week.
That's great.
One of the rituals we have right now is a break.
Yeah, we have a fundamental. Our fundamental.
I just called a break. Let's do that.
And what we're going to do after that break is find a way back into this great conversation.
Works for me.
with David Friedman and on culture.
We'll be right back.
Back with more CEO chat after these messages.
There you go.
Or just want to eat like one? Visit Rostelli Market Fresh, your home for the freshest locally sourced ingredients to please everyone who loves great food. Our organic meats, quality seafood, and free-range poultry are cut fresh to order. Chefs create culinary-inspired prep foods made fresh every day, which pair nicely with our vast selection of fine wines and spirits. Choose from handmade pastas, artisan cheeses, organic produce, and grocery items, all from the finest purveyors. Rostelli Market Fresh, from our family to yours.
RVN TV is a platform for people of any industry to share their story. Over 285,000 viewers are tuning in to RVN TV shows monthly. We guarantee a great experience that you'll be sharing with everyone you know while increasing your personal and company's brand awareness. But what is your brand? According to Forbes, it's a combination of your logo, your product, your design and feel, and your personality. Did you know that aside from being a guest, we offer even more opportunity to boost your brand? Adding your company logo and website on screen during your interview will allow viewers to recognize your brand instantly.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to CEO Chat. My name is Alcini.
I'm still Joe Osmendi.
And
Still.
it's always a pleasure working with you.
You too.
And we're talking with David Friedman about something that everybody is saying something about, but nobody really quite understands what it is, and that's culture. And we're picking up the conversation with a discussion of the importance of operationalizing culture by focusing on behaviors rather than just on values.
Exactly.
If that makes a lot of, I mean,
Exactly.
if that makes sense to you, I know it should be making sense to everybody
It's
out
pretty
there.
logical.
So people who are watching our program, could be owners of companies. I'm thinking family-owned businesses in particular.
We
could
deal with a
really-
lot of family-owned
and
businesses.
because they have a way of wandering away from the core mission of the company and getting focused on the family, your job would be to remind them again what it was the company was formed for. Get back to the fundamentals of behavior that serve the customers rather than the family. That's, to me anyway, that's the holy grail of a strong organization.
It is, and interestingly, in family business, this is true of all businesses, but especially family businesses. When you talk to family businesses, I think of this often as a way of preserving the legacy of the founder.
Sure.
That you've got a founder, and he or she started the business, and when they started the business, they just tried to set a good example. And just by the sheer nature of the example they set, that was enough to carry the day. In other words, when the company had 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people, you're the founder, and I'm around you, and I see you, and I pick up the vibe, and that's good enough.
Right.
But as the company grows, and it goes from 10 or 15 or 20 people to 50 or 100 or 200, or maybe has some other locations, or maybe makes an acquisition or two, or maybe in a family business passes from one generation to another. If we haven't found some way to, in a sense, codify what that founder was about,
to preserve that
to
role
preserve
model
that
that
role
represented
model.
the company when it
Exactly.
was
It gets
created.
lost. It gets diluted.
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
why it becomes so important. There's a word I sometimes use to institutionalize the culture, to get it to be so deeply ingrained in the organization that you work here, it's just how we do things. And that's really the system that I've created.
That's one
is
of the
how you
definitions of culture, is how we
institutionalize
do
it.
things around here.
Exactly. And so how
but
do you
it's how
get
we
that
do
ingrained?
things around here. It's not how we feel. It's how
Exactly.
we do.
It's how we
act,
do.
how we
These are
behave.
behaviors.
But
Yes.
this has got such a huge impact potential for customer experience management and
Everything.
I mean, the way you relate to clients, the way you relate to each other.
Most of our clients say this is the single most impactful thing they've done in the history of their company.
What usually triggers a company to want to hire you in the first place?
Most of the time, it's reading one of my books or hearing me speak. Because what happens, as I was referring to earlier, is most of the time, these are good companies.
Right.
These are people who get that culture is important. In fact, they're usually proud of their culture. They've just never seen or heard of a way of being more systematic about it. So again, they're a leader who says, I believe in culture, and I'm proud of my culture, and I'm a big promoter of culture, but we've just been kind of doing it sort of by chance. And then they either hear one of my workshops, they read one of my books, they hear me speak somewhere, and for the first time, it's like a light bulb goes off, and they realize, wow, there's a way that I never heard of before that I could be more systematic. I can do this.
This is something I
and then
can
they're
do.
all over it. They hire us to help them do that.
And you've been doing this for how long?
About 7 years.
About 7 years. And you got clients all over the country, not just in, I know
yes.
You're based in South Jersey.
Based in
That's where
South
you live.
Jersey, but I
But you
travel
travel.
every week. I'm in some part of the country giving workshops for CEOs.
That's great.
And so our clients are all over the country. We
And
work
how
with
long
hundreds
is an
of them.
engagement with a client typically?
Typically, from the time we originally create their fundamentals and help them figure them out till we roll it out and start practicing, takes all of about 60 days. So
Really?
within
That's it.
60 days,
Okay.
they're up and running practicing fundamentals every week, and then they're doing this for the rest of their lives.
And the goal really is to teach them to fish.
Yes, to teach them to
so
fish.
when this is all done, they know how
Yes,
to catch fish.
yes. In fact, we've even created, to help them drive that, we've created a mobile app. And the mobile app, what it does, it's really cool. Every week, it pushes out to people a daily quick tip. So every day they're reminded of
fundamental.
something about the fundamental.
Yeah, a fundamental.
Every a message goes out there, our teaching contents, videos, e-minder lessons that we call them, just all kinds of content that gets pushed out on their mobile phone every single day to remind them of their fundamental of the week. So it's just all kinds of ways to engage them every week.
Great. And the 8 steps I know you describe in your book, Culture by Design. I want to
Yes.
remind everybody, fundamentally different, Culture by Design. Both books, David Friedman, and you can get them on Amazon.
Yes, so these are on Amazon, and they're in all forms. They're in hardcover, softcover, ebook, and they're also on Audible in audio form. And I've done the audio recordings for both books,
Oh,
so
great.
they're all available.
And the 8-step framework, maybe
So
really
yes,
quickly.
so the 8-step framework. Again, the 2 steps we've been talking about and focusing on, and I focused on them because they are the biggest
critical.
drivers. You know, I have to say this in the simplest form. If we can define in really clear terms the behaviors that drive success in your company, and then we can create a structured, systematic way to teach them to people over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. To your point, sooner or later, these are just going to become internalized in our people. So that's the core of it. The other 6 steps are also important, but those 2 things really drive it. So the other 6 steps refer to step 3 is how do we hire the right people who are going to be a good fit for our culture? Step 4 is how do we, I call it integrate people. Some people refer to it as onboarding. How do we take the people we just hired and how do we bring them into the fold in the company? I call that integration. It has enormous influence over culture. The 5th step is how we communicate the culture, how we make it visible everywhere around the organization. The 6th step is how we coach to the culture. All the different ways that we can coach people in our daily interactions and use the language and the vocabulary of our culture in that coaching to make it relevant and real and meaningful. The 7th step in the overall framework, I call it is leading by example, is, you know, we could talk about this stuff till we're blue in our face, but you know this, that as leaders, we have to model it. You know,
if I don't see my boss do it,
then it doesn't
why would I
matter.
want to?
Exactly. So,
Yep.
so how we make sure as leaders that we're good examples. And the 8th step in the overall framework is I call it driving accountability. All the different ways that we can show people that we're serious. From our fundamentals should be in our performance reviews.
Right.
I mean, if they're not in our performance reviews, how important are they? We do annual surveys to hold ourselves accountable and have people rate us on how well we live to our fundamental. Getting rid of people. I mean, I'll tell you that I often ask leaders, the single biggest way of demonstrating accountability and seriousnness is getting rid of somebody who's typically, they're typically a high performer. They wreak havoc in the organization, but they bring in a lot of business, or they have a lot of customer relationships.
As soon as you got that question, what would I do without John or
exactly,
Pete?
exactly.
The answer should be find out.
That's exactly it.
You should find out right now.
It's the funniest thing is that everybody's had that experience.
Oh, yeah.
And when you allow those people to stay in your company, you're basically saying to people, you know what, our culture is really important around here.
Yeah.
Unless you produce enough business.
Yeah, there you
that's
go.
what basically.
In which case the culture really doesn't matter. I mean,
It
the
doesn't.
truth is-
Sometimes I say, this is kind of blunt, but I say it this way often, that the best way for me to really know the culture in your company is to look at the behavior that you tolerate.
That's interesting.
What
That's
you
a great
allow.
point.
Yeah, we could put all the signs on the wall that we want, but what you allow to go on around here,
That speaks
the real
volumes
culture.
to everybody.
It
Everybody
does.
sees it.
It does.
And they all know it.
They do.
So they're wondering what's wrong with you because
That's exactly
what's
it.
going on around here.
Yes.
What we're hearing this person say or what we're seeing them do is exactly the opposite of what you're saying are fundamentals around here.
Exactly.
Why are you putting up
Yes.
with it? That's a great point.
The funny thing is that when I talk about that in workshops, I'll sometimes ask leaders, so how many of you have ever fired one of those people? And they all raise their hand. And then I'll ask them, so when you did, what did everybody else say? And they all say practically in unison, thank God. I was wondering when you were going to do this.
Why didn't you do this last year?
And then the even
I know.
funnier thing is, then I'll ask the leaders, what did you say to yourself afterwards? And practically in unison, they'll say, I should have done this a long time ago. What took me so long? They
Why did I
all
put up
know
with this
this.
for so long?
But
So-
it's difficult to get rid of a producer, though.
It is, but
Yeah.
are we serious about this or not?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah.
You know, and
But-
it's another point too is that when you use something like fundamentals to really clearly express what it is we do around here,
Yes.
sometimes people who just can't meet that standard will self-select out of the organization.
Some will,
You know?
although some will for sure. Though my experience is that, most of us, we have a vested interest in protecting our own ego. And so it's not often that somebody's going to say, you know what, this company is really amazing and they're just going to great places, but I just don't fit in. They don't usually say, what it sounds like usually is, I don't know what's going on around here. It's not like it used to be. They're just
Yeah,
stupid. That's why I'm leaving. And you're right. Okay, fine. And you let them leave.
Wow.
So they do drop off the
Well-
back end, but it sounds more like that versus them thinking that they don't quite fit
Yeah,
in.
I know what you mean. Where they
Yes.
pretty much reject the whole organization.
Exactly.
They basically fire everybody else in their
Exactly.
heads.
In their heads, yes.
Yeah, which is
Yes.
upside down if you
Yes,
think about it.
exactly.
Well, you know, I think what's interesting about this is that you can make a difference inside of a company in a way that they probably don't anticipate in the very beginning. And how quickly generally do you get results? when
You
make
see
changes
results
like this?
immediately. That when we roll out a set of fundamentals, there are two things that happen immediately. First thing that happens, which is really important, is language changes. People begin to use the language of the fundamentals. Hey, remember, we got to be a fanatic about response
They
time.
say things like this. We say this. This is,
exactly.
we pick up the phone on the third ring.
Yes,
or
it
second
just
ring.
it becomes how they think, which is important. The second thing that happens is on the first day, there will be situations that are handled differently than they would have been the week before. The most common example, one of the fundamentals I refer to that's in every one of our clients because it's so important, I call it practice blameless problem solving. So on the first day, you'll see a situation come up where previously people would have been pointing fingers and figuring out whose fault it was, and you'll hear people say, hey, remember, we've got to practice blameless problem solving, and they'll solve the problem differently. The changes happen rapidly.
Well,
And
we're coming up
Yeah.
on that part of the program where you get to tell everybody how they can reach you.
Okay, great.
If you want to make a fundamental change in the way your organization runs, and it could be a small company with just a couple of people in it, it could be a big company.
Everything in
Doesn't make
between.
any difference. This is a guy you want to call, David Friedman. So look right into your camera and
Sure.
tell everybody how to reach you, Dave.
So you can reach me. My company is High Performing Culture. Our website is highperformingculture.com. That's simple. And it's performing, not performance. So highperformingculture.com. My books are on Amazon. My email is david@highperformingculture.com. And our phone number is 877-HPC-5050.
David Friedman, what a pleasure having you on the
Enjoyed
program.
being with you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure as well.
And thanks all of you for tuning into this very enlightening, very interesting episode of CEO Chat. And we'll be back again next Friday with another episode. Till then, this guy is Joe Assamendi,
And that's my partner,
my
Alcini.
high-performing culture partner.
There you go.
And I'm Alcini, and have a great weekend.
Yeah. Be safe, sound. We'll see you next Friday.
You bet.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dave.